With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
The BBC acts on behalf of the state, and when it comes to international affairs, even more brazenly so. The BBC World Service. What do you think the BBC World Service is? It's MI6 with a microphone. It has the same enemies as MI6 and the same friends, and whatever MI6 wants, it gets, and indeed much of its funding even comes from the British Foreign Office, which is the parent of MI6. So the BBC, I want nothing to do with it. They want nothing to do with me, I should admit, but I want nothing to do with it. I hope it goes under. I hope Trump sues them. I hope he costs them $1 billion, and I hope it gets broken up.
Tonight you are saying to our viewers that you will go forward and file a defamation lawsuit against the BBC.
Well, I think I have an obligation to do it.
I spoke to the president on Friday. He just said to me, "Is this how you treat your best ally?" It's quite a powerful comment, isn't it?
We've had Jacob Rees-Mogg saying Trump is entitled to do this and justified in doing this. Farage has pretty well come out and said...
Well, the GB News presenters, as far as I can see, isn't it interesting that GB News seems to be getting behind this fight? And now you have Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg on the payroll of GB News attacking the BBC and supporting Donald Trump.
The biggest defender of the BBC today, the most outspoken, has been Ed Davey.
Sir Ed Davey has been saying that he believes the BBC are not perfect, has to be defended, and he said that Donald Trump, in his view, was not a defending freedom of speech. He was trying to seize on one mistake by one programme, he said, to undermine the whole organisation. We simply cannot let that happen.
In fact, the only British political leader really standing up for the BBC at this moment is Sir Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats, who said it's easy to see why Donald Trump wants to trash the BBC and destroy it, and calling on the Prime Minister and other British political leaders to speak up on its behalf and to stop him getting his hands on it, as he put it.
President Trump is trying to destroy our BBC, not because he cares about the truth, but because he doesn't want to get away with his lies. Trump has undermined press freedom in America. Now he's trying to do the same here, disgracefully egged on by the leader of reform. So will the Prime Minister tell President Trump to drop his demand for $1 billion settlement from the BBC? And will he guarantee that President Trump will not get a single penny from British licence fee payers?
Now, unfortunately, even though there are so many topics we could talk about, we have to tackle the issue of the BBC and this defamation case. Can I just ask you, how did you feel when you were first shown the footage or told about this edit, which the BBC say is unintentional to depict you in that way? But how do you feel about it?
Do they say it's unintentional? Well, then they're stupid to say that. You know, they wrote me a letter of apology, as you know.
How was it?
But then it's fine, but what is it?
Yeah.
It's fine. They wrote me a nice letter. We apologize. But when you say it's unintentional, I guess if it's unintentional, you don't apologize, right? You know, I made a beautiful statement, and they made it into a not beautiful statement. And now I hear, just before this interview, I was told, somebody said, "So you were not going to believe it, BBC did it again. They found another place, I think at a totally different..."
On Newsnight.
Yeah, totally different place. You know, the word fake is one thing, but this is beyond fake. This is corrupt, what they did. So, no, you know, the lawyers walked in and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this." And they showed, I didn't hear about it, my lawyers walked in and they just said, you know, the White House lawyers, they're government lawyers actually, and they walked in and they said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this." I said, "What is it?" And they show me the one, and then they show me the other. And it's not even close, you know, it's different words. It looks like it's actually the same mouth movement. Who would be able to even find this? Somebody did an amazing job to be able to, but it's a totally different meaning and totally different words.
They'd clipped together, hadn't they, two parts of the speech that were nearly an hour apart.
It's incredible.
To depict the idea that you had given this aggressive speech which led to this riot.
And one making you into a bad guy, and the other one was, you know, my statement was a very calming statement. It's pretty incredible. I mean, I couldn't believe it, actually. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never seen anything like that. That's the most egregious. I think that was worse than the Kamala thing with CBS and 60 Minutes.
How far will you push it? Because they haven't offered, our understanding is they've offered no money whatsoever. They've apologised in a letter, but they haven't offered you a penny in compensation. There was this figure of $1 billion that you may be pursuing.
I think I have an obligation to do it. Look, I'm not looking to get into lawsuits, but I think I have an obligation to do it. This was so egregious. If you don't do it, you don't stop it from happening again with other people. I think you probably have an obligation. I'd like to find out why they did it. You know, it's so bad.
Yeah.
Who thinks like this?
Where do you see this going now, President Trump? Do you see this being a long, legal, protracted conflict with the BBC? Would you like to see it tied up quickly? Well, they've admitted their guilt, but they don't have to admit their guilt. It's on tape, you know. I mean, there's nothing to admit. No, I think very shortly we have a statutory period. We've notified them by writing, and I think you have to wait a week. And so that time's coming up, and after that time comes up, we'll sue them. My lawyers say for $1 billion or more, and we'll see how it all works out. But I will say, I think I have an obligation to bring a major lawsuit against the BBC, because what they did is impossible to believe. You would have never even thought that. Even the Kamala thing, to a certain extent, you know, was so bad, but you could see how it could happen. Yeah. And it's the idea, I suppose, that you're doing it not just for you, because your feeling is, well, if they could misrepresent me in that way, they could misrepresent anybody in that way.
Well, they can be doing it. And one of the things we'll find out during this litigation, through depositions and everything, is how many other times have they done it to your prime minister? Have they done it to Nigel? Have they done it to, you know, the people that are in your country? The answer is probably yes, but we'll be finding out a lot of things over the next few months. And one of the things, you know, your litigation moves a little bit quickly in your country. So I think it's going to go fairly quickly, although I don't know that we bring it there. We probably bring it someplace in the U.S. from our standpoint.
And you've had success with suing media companies before on behalf of you, and also Melania as well.
Yeah, that's true. And Melania's had success. No, we've had a lot of success because it's fake news. But I've never had anything so fake as the BBC.
He's angry with the BBC, and you know what? He's got every right to be angry with the BBC.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom, and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to the Protagonists on The World Today. I'm Mike Ryan, nice to have your company. Our topic today, Trump versus the BBC and the media. Now the BBC is on the back foot. It's been caught out with a misleading piece of editing of President Trump's January 6th speech. Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for no less than $1 billion, claiming the Panorama documentary represented his role in the January 6th attack. Trump's legal team says the BBC edited video to look like he urged supporters to fight like hell immediately after directing them to march on the Capitol. Trump has not backed down despite an apology and the resignation of two senior staff, including the BBC Director General and news CEO. In interviews, he stated that he has an obligation to sue the BBC over its fake news, and it should be stopped, as what's been done to him can easily be done to others. The broadcaster's supporters argue that Trump's threats to the BBC and American media are aimed at silencing critics and undermining the press. Indeed, so concerned it was about the lawsuit, the BBC has censored parts of a transcript of a prestigious lecture given by a Dutch writer, telling its presenters and journos they cannot even quote the censored lines which accuse Trump of being the most openly corrupt president in American history. Will Trump pull down the BBC, or is the BBC pulling itself down? There seems to be just a lot of pulling going on. The BBC has withstood many scandals and constant accusations of bias. An internal report outlined major concerns about poor editorial standards and bias. In addition, the BBC is now losing more than $1 billion a year, £1 billion a year, from households either evading the licence fee or deciding they don't need one. What does our expert panel think about Trump's intervention? Should it be feared or welcomed as a way of improving BBC editorial standards? Or will Donald Trump bring the house down on this British institution? Our guest today, we may have the third one, but our guest today, Dr. Greg Simons, geopolitical commentator and expert in media and communications, and John Mair, distinguished journalist and broadcaster, including at the BBC. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, as they say in America.
Yep, absolutely fantastic. We're just waiting on one other one, William Clouston. I don't know where he is, because we slept in.
Let's start the party without him, shall we?
Yes, we will indeed, sir. Can I just get, Greg, can I just get your views on this? And I know you're not a great Trump supporter by any stretch, but should he continue with his litigation and his suing of the BBC, or should he back down? And do they deserve to be sued?
Well, I mean, as you say, I'm not a big Trump fan, oddly enough. But here, the BBC makes someone who is lacking a moral and ethical compass, it's giving him some moral high ground from which to do this publicity. Because, yeah, I mean, this is intentional. If you splice something like that, this is not accidental. And the BBC has a pretty horrendous record of going after people which the British government doesn't particularly like. And this, I think, is connected to the fact that the BBC Charter actually stipulates that the BBC is an enabler of strategic communication by the British government. I mean, their charter states it. And on the other hand, you have this fake news, this particular line. And if we look at fake news, I mean, the definition has not remained consistent over time. If we go back 15, 20 years ago, fake news was something which was contrived, it was something constructed. And fake news at that time consisted of things like talk shows and such. So this is quite different from what it became about 10 years ago, when it became something where fake news was it was something which was deliberate. It was a manipulation, a distortion of reality. And now, I mean, Trump in his last term, so Trump 1.0, then shifted the goalposts again, and fake news became something which was objectionable to one's own worldview. So anything that defied Trump's worldview became fake news. I mean, the quote about CNN, for example, as being fake news. So fake news, I mean, this idea, it's not only an action, it's an accusation as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, William, you're a ex-BBC, I presume still at the BBC in some form. Being a producer, you also understand that they have high editorial standards that need to be met. This would seem a terrible lapse in concentration and I see that the hierarchy were blown out or resigned. But there's a bunch of editors too, aren't there, and producers that would have realised what they were doing. And I know that Captain says he must. He'll go down with the ship, but I think there are others that should be held accountable. But it's not the only time, and all government media is the same. I mean, in Australia, the ABC is very biased, and in the US, you've got what's that public TV network called? But they're quite biased towards generally what the government wants, and the BBC is no different. But should more be done? Do you think Donald Trump should sue the BBC? And if not, why not?
Mike, look, I mean, I think my friend has been far too kind to Donald Trump there. Look, the BBC made a mistake. It's indefensible what happened. They bolted two bits of zinc together. They shouldn't have done. They made a mistake. They apologized. They've apologized to Trump. But Trump actually wants to close down the BBC, as he wants to close down all public service broadcasting. He's closed down PBS in the States, closed down NPR, closed down the Voice of America. He doesn't believe in public service broadcasting. So that's his mission. If he succeeds in this legal case, by the way, it's a very, very poor legal case because he can't bring it in Britain, and he probably can't bring it in America because the program wasn't shown in America. He will bankrupt the BBC. He's claiming $5 million, which is the entire British license fee. This is our BBC, not Trump's BBC. We should just tell him to shove off, because he's just doing this for nasty political and authoritarian and censorship reasons. So I mean, let's not be kind to Trump. Trump has no altruism. Trump is an authoritarian leader, and the BBC shouldn't ever give in to him.
So I get the impression that you're not a Trump supporter, but and being a producer, do you think, unfortunately, that bias, not just from yourself, I don't mean that you're part of this, but there is a particular bias against particular political figures around the world? Isn't the job of a media, especially a news organisation, to report report it as it is? Don't make up stories. Don't let your political bias come into it. Report the story as it is. It would seem.
I totally agree, but look, I mean, the BBC is not neutral on racism. Would it be neutral on Hitler? I hope not. Should it ever be neutral on people who are malevolent? Probably not. But by and large, BBC goes straight down the line. This was a mistake, and a mistake has been admitted. Most of the time, the BBC is far too kind to Trump. And by the way, it's not a government station. It's a publicly financed station. It's financed by license payers, not by the government. So get the idea of a state broadcast out of your head on this one.
Greg, and I'll come back to also to John on this. It would seem that Donald Trump's criticism of the BBC isn't that far off from what the public is not getting from the BBC. And if you look at the number of licenses out there, or they've lost I think it's at £1 billion in licenses, it would mean that a great majority of people in the UK do not want to pay for.
That's not true. There are 23 million people who do buy licenses. 300,000 didn't buy their license last year. So put those figures: 23 million against 300,000. So half of everybody, by the way, pays for their license. They're happy to.
Greg, and thank you very much for that. And it's a good point, because we often hear how and figures are stretched because they say, the whole country doesn't like something, and a protest might have 100,000. It doesn't mean that the other 72 million agree with what's happening. However, it would show you also, John, that the trends are that people are dissatisfied at the moment, or and I'll get to Greg on this one, then I'll come back to you. Or is it, do you think, Greg, because things are tough, they can't find the dollars, or do they think that the BBC is a waste of money?
Well, I mean, the BBC, it's shed a lot of its reputation in the recent years over different things. I mean, you watched when they approach, for example, anti-systemic protests like the farmer protests. I think there was one of them in particular in Netherlands, and BBC reporter approached one of the protesters and said, I'm from media. I would like to ask you some questions. Where do you come from? BBC. And the Dutch protester said, F off, BBC. So you've got this antagonism because you've got people which feel that the BBC is misrepresenting them and their particular cause. I mean, if we look, for example, at another more recent and contemporary issue, we can see how they cover Gaza, for example. I mean, this is problematic from so many different points of view. And you got a disproportionate leaning towards one party, that is towards Israel. And I mean, of course, the BBC is caught in a very precarious situation.
Hang on a minute. Isn't that true of all broadcasters in Gaza? You know, they weren't allowed into Gaza. The BBC.
But let me finish. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Well, as I was saying, that puts them in a difficult position because if they criticize Israel, then the Israeli lobby bangs after the BBC. But if they give a disproportionate coverage towards Israel to avoid that, or for whatever reason, of course, this belittles the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. And of course, the BBC, like everyone else, because the journalists have been absolutely targeted, regardless of which media outlet they come from in Gaza. But yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism. I mean, like Media Lens, for example, which is a fact-checking, if we like, enterprise.
Quite left wing enterprise.
Yeah, but still, they have some valid points about criticising the BBC. And I mean, yeah, I mean, the license fee you have to pay. So, I mean, this is problem. I mean, Sweden had the license fee too. I think it's gone voluntary, but for a long time, you had to pay a license fee. You had no choice. And the state broadcasters, the public TV and so forth, I mean, it was absolutely not presenting different aspects to the public, such as the migration issue in Sweden. So public broadcasters have dug themselves a bit of a hole through this. And I mean, you can see that Trump, I mean, I really do not like him, but he on this occasion, he has been given a point. He has been given a moral high ground by the actions, which I do not think were inadvertent, given the number of criticisms and complaints directed at the BBC.
Mike, if I can come in there. First of all, let's get rid of this idea that the BBC is a state broadcaster. It's not. It's a public broadcaster. Now, in Gaza, the international media were excluded from Gaza, and they should have kicked up. They should have said to Israelis, we're not doing with this. But the BBC actually carried on and used lots and lots of freelance material from Gaza, and by and large tried to report Gaza, and I think succeeded. But you're right in that the Israeli and the Jewish lobby leaned very, very heavily on the BBC over Gaza and said, you really shouldn't report it at all. But look, 23 million people are happy to pay for entertainment, sport, everything else on the BBC and news. And the idea that the BBC is a biased broadcaster is for the birds, I'm afraid. People don't regard it as biased. They trust the BBC. Still they trust the BBC. So Media Lens can say what Media Lens like, but in times of emergency, what do people go to? They go to the BBC.
Can I just, I need to disagree with you there. I'm not trying to do what they did to you on Talk TV. I saw the video and I thought, don't know the guy's name, but I thought he was a disgrace, by the way.
Jeremy Khan.
Yeah, he was just terrible, John, and I think you did very well But I think the guy, people would probably refer to him as a pig. That's just what I thought anyway. So
let me just give you one line about Jeremy Kyle. He used to present a TV revealing show, where he revealed things about people. One guest committed suicide. He lost the TV show.
Yep. But just getting back to the, you say people trust the BBC. Here's the thing. People trusted doctors. People trusted government. At the moment, the medical profession and the government is under huge amount of pressure because people don't trust them. And you would agree there. You have to agree there. I haven't attacked the BBC here. Now, if and you say it's a public broadcaster, but it is also, it is, many have said it, and I'm not saying this, but even though actually I do, it's a propaganda arm from the government in many ways because it will push the narrative from the government. And if it doesn't push the narrative, if it doesn't push the narrative from the government, John, what happens?
Well, look, and plainly, neither you watch the BBC. Look, at the moment, this government is very unpopular, and the BBC is reflecting that. It's saying, look, how long has Keir Starmer got? It is not a propaganda arm. In many senses, the BBC brought down Boris Johnson. In many senses, they brought down Liz Truss by straight reporting about how utterly useless they were, and the public saw that. So don't believe the BBC's bias. It's not. I don't work in there anymore, but believe me, as you walk in the door, they stamp impartiality on your forehead.
I don't think that's right, Greg. Do you think? Truly, and it's just like here in the ABC here, and would imagine in New Zealand and stuff. They parrot the narrative. Greg.
They are obliged to do the strategic communication for the British government. It is in the BBC Charter. This is an obligation. And as for trust, I mean, I meet fewer and fewer people who trust the BBC because they don't feel it represents them. And I mean, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss needed no help in destroying their own credibility in the public space. I mean, they were sufficiently qualified to do that by themselves.
But the BBC reported them. And reported their transgressions and their weaknesses. That's not a government station, is it? Those are the Prime Minister. They were reporting on their weaknesses.
Yeah, but look, people do not believe this a lot of the BBC, especially the foreign reporting. I mean, if I use BBC material in my academic research, it's generally along the lines of propaganda research because it's carrying a certain line, it's carrying a certain bias. This is not something which is balanced and carrying both sides of the argument. And I mean,
how have they reported in Bangladesh, Greg? What's the reporting in Bangladesh been like?
The BBC reporting.
Yeah, how have they reported last year's coup or whatever it was, and what's happened since? Have they been fair?
As I say, generally I don't follow the BBC specifically because I don't consider it a credible and reliable source. And there's
you're in a small minority there,
I don't think I'm in a small minority, actually.
Empirical evidence is that it's still the world's most trusted broadcaster and Britain's most trusted broadcaster. That's the empirical evidence. That's not hearsay.
Well, I don't see evidence in that in the discussions which I have with people.
Maybe you live in a different bubble.
Well, I think I would suggest that the BBC bubble is rapidly shrinking.
There are problems. The BBC bubble is rather large, and it's still the world's most trusted broadcaster.
But it's not, John. No. You say it is, and people will say it is, but there are many who don't regard that as the truth. So what we're doing is we're saying everybody trusts the BBC. No, they don't. Sorry, John. If you look at
he says, she says. I mean, Look, I mean, we live in a world of relative truth, my truth, your truth, everybody's
No,
truth.
no, 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 John. First of all, there is not my truth, and there's not your truth. There is, and as a producer, you know this. There is only the fact. You tell it as it is. And when you start putting my truth and your truth into it, John, what happens is it becomes an opinion. So there's
You
not.
don't get that on
But
BBC.
here's the thing. Let to prove a point here. Journalists are taught these days to insert their own opinion. Am I
Yeah, as
right?
long as you know it's an opinion, as long as
No, no,
it's
but
labelled.
you don't know, and that's the because we know it's called fudging, whatever you want to call it, and you can write a story, and if it has a particular narrative, you can still do the swing, and Greg will attest to this. You can still swing it towards the other side, but what you do is you write it in such a way for example, if there was a car crash and it was being driven at a bunch of people in the street, and what you're doing is and they were driven, just for example, by just say Muslims. I'm just using this as an example. What the BBC would do, John, what the BBC would do, and most media will do, is say it was driven by a bunch of people, or not the exact words, but they won't mention the nationality, and the nationality of that particular, or the culture of that particular person, is important if you're looking at what's happening these days. So to lessen the impact.
Hang on, just stop a second. So you said if there's a car crash and the car was driven
No,
by a
no, I'm
Muslim,
saying
we should actually say it was a
I checked
Muslim.
myself, John. I said I didn't say car, and then I said if the car was driven into a group of people.
Right, okay.
So yeah, so if it was a car crash, it mean it's just two people have been hurt, and nothing to do with the cultures. But if you look at what's happening at the moment, for example, in the UK, we have this immigration unrest, whatever you want to call it, and there is a massive unrest. And then so therefore, if that accident happened, or if they drove into like for example, your violent crimes, they don't mention it was a Middle
Hang
Eastern.
on, there's not massive unrest. There are a few people demonstrating
No, but
outside
there is.
migrant hotels.
John, there's an enormous amount of unrest. What do you think we? Okay, when we had and compared to the BBC, of course, but we had well over 100 million people that would, and out of those 100 million people that used to watch us, that would come and watch us, out of those 100 million people, all of those were on the same page that we were on. And we're not saying we're not saying, John, at all that they were the entire audience out there, because they're not. But what I am saying is there's a great swell, or great leaning away from the BBC. And why would that be, John? Why would that be?
Look, you've not provided me with one piece of evidence so far. You provided me with lots of opinion, both of
Okay,
you.
let me give you one now. Can I ask you, a man and a woman? Okay, they are. We know what a man is. We know what a woman is. Okay,
It's just transgender and trans.
No. I'm sorry. A man is a man and a woman is a woman, and that's it. But what I'm trying to do here, John, is just to show you. You wanted an example. So, for example, Martine Croxall, when she broke the rules over pregnant people, and she checked herself, said women, because a man cannot get pregnant. Yet she
got slapped on the wrist, and that's pretty stupid of the BBC.
Why should she get slapped on the wrist?
Well, God knows, but she got slapped on the wrist. And
so therefore, but see what you're doing, John. You're being quite selective, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No, she got slapped on the wrist, and it was wrong. The BBC.
Why was it wrong? Why was it wrong? John. But
was wrong with the BBC.
You asked me to show you, and Greg will do it in a second. But you asked me to show you, John, and we're not attacking you or the BBC. You asked me to show you an example of it. And surely, John, please, surely though, John, this is the reason, from what I'm seeing and what our audience is telling us. Yep. This is the reason why the trust is lacking.
But you have no proof of that. Look,
but I do. I do have proof. Okay, you're down $1 billion in your license fees. There's the proof.
Major broadcaster, which does 9,000 hours of broadcasting.
I said you asked for the proof. I've given you the proof.
Well, you have what? Maxine Coxall?
No. You asked me. I said to you. I said, John. You've been a very good producer here. But I said to you, John, that you said it makes no difference, something like that. I'm saying to you that the proof is in the eating of the pudding. The lack of trust is now showing out because you're down $1 billion in fees. Surely, surely that shows you that
let's go back, shall we?
shows you, John. Surely that shows you, John. There's a trend. There's a trend, and that trend I would put to you, John. That trend I would put to you is simply because they are losing trust. The British public are losing trust with the BBC, who are not impartial by any stretch. And when you say,
let's go back.
I've done this for 50 years. I can tell you now that they are not impartial. It's just clever writing. And you know that, and I know that. You're a producer. So don't try and pull the wool over my bloody eyes, mate.
23 million pay their license fees. 300,000 didn't last year.
And how many do that willingly?
Well, they all have to pay it by law anyway.
Yes, but you've got £1 billion pounds out of the kitty now of those people who will not do that.
Gentlemen, let me ask both of you a question. How would you finance the BBC? How would you like the BBC to be?
I would like them to go away.
There you are.
I don't think we need in this day and age an institution that limits that limits the truth and puts an impasse on people having to pay to watch it. And I think in Australia's case, for example, we have the ABC that is paid by the Australian government. They should not finance them. They all need to be in the commercial arena, so to speak. They need to stand on their feet and if they are good enough, then they're going to make some money. And if they're not good enough, they'll go belly up. That's a fair thing. But they're not. You put a law in, your country puts a law into people that if you want to watch the BBC, you've got to pay for it. That's absolute garbage. You know that.
Been there for 100 years. Been there for 100 years, and then people have accepted
but it's 100 years. They had 100 years ago. They had people with swords riding horses.
No, that's not quite true.
But it is. But things have changed.
Look, if you believe in public broadcasting, you don't. You plainly don't.
No, but we don't. Not anymore. Not anymore. You don't need it. But why do you need? Okay, John. Why do you need public broadcasting?
You need public broadcasting to keep the rest of you honest, apart from anything else. And keep the quality.
Greg, would you like to step in here?
Yeah, there was a poll 4 days ago. 75% of respondents do not trust the BBC anymore. This is clear. The BBC, if you're talking about public broadcasting, it should serve public interest. It clearly does not serve public interest. It serves selected government or political interests. And
what would you like it to be? What would you like it to be, Greg?
This is clear in its reporting style. And, I mean, it doesn't bring on people who give an opposing point of view. It has its own nice little echo chamber so that they can...
Are you saying there's not enough right-wingers on there? I mean, there's a right-wing station in this country called GB News, and all they have is right-wingers. Would you like the BBC to be
but John, you're saying that they have... But for example, first of all, you attacked Donald Trump. By the way, we're very disappointed also with him because his policies outside the borders are quite well, he hasn't got a whole lot of international experience and it shows through. But taking that aside, your bias against anyone who's on the conservative side is quite evident. And surely, again, as a producer, you're not supposed to have that. As a producer, John, you're supposed to be impartial. And I don't see any impartiality.
I'm a social conservative. Of course I've got opinions. You know, everybody's got opinions. But I don't work for the BBC anymore. I can have lots of opinions. I've got opinions about Australia. I've got opinions about the Ashes. You know,
that's a great one.
You know, what's that?
That's a terrific. Now the Ashes are going swimmingly well, by the way. Just thought I'd let you know.
Yes, they are for you, but not for.
Good one. You've thrown up the red herring. Slap him down, Greg, quick.
Everybody's got. Look, what do you guys? You don't want the BBC, do you? Why don't you be honest? You like Trump. You actually don't want a public broadcast.
No, we're not like Trump. We're not.
No.
But John, do you think in this day and age, and look, the whole world's going through a great upheaval, isn't it?
Madness, going through madness.
So do you think we actually need, though, to be forcing people or governments paying for a public broadcaster, truly, in this day and age, surely
I
in
do.
this day and
I
age,
do.
John, can I ask you this question? Surely in this day and age, you should be able to finance yourself.
That if the BBC went commercial, that would flatten all the British commercial stations, the native ones.
Well, no,
ITV,
but
Channel 4,
isn't that,
Channel 5 would
and you
die.
know what? If it does, it does. If it
Okay.
does, but if it doesn't, it doesn't. So
Well, it would leave, therefore, one station, one
no,
broadcast.
but man, having done this all my life, I'm a terrible person, John. I've done nothing else but. I can tell you that is absolute rubbish. You even said it. You said, "Oh, look at GB News. All they have is all the right wingers." So already they have an audience, and that audience, I would dare say, all those people that would watch GB News probably don't like the BBC. Now, if
They don't.
that's
They hate it. They hate it.
okay, so here we are. You said if the BBC went out and went commercial, no one else would be around. Already, we've agreed that you're wrong because you would have GB.
No, you're stated. Look, GB News, I don't know how much you know about GB News. I appear
I
on it.
do. I know a lot about GB News.
GB News is very heavily subsidized by right wing millionaires.
Yes,
You know, right
and
wing
you're
Christians.
very heavily, and the BBC is very heavily subsidised by people who don't want to subsidise the
It's
BBC.
subsidized by real people, subsidized by you, by me, lots and
But
lots
they
of
don't
people.
want to subsidise, and that's the point I'm making.
You've no proof of that. You've no proof of that.
But
Why
again,
do people
75% of a survey said they couldn't give a rat's about the
have very
BBC.
much members?
So they're wrong. Okay.
How do you pay? What do you want? Do you want the BBC to be right wing? Do you want it to be GB News?
No, no,
Is
no,
that
no.
what you like?
The BBC, first of all, if the BBC wants to be right wing, left wing, have two wings, whatever they want to do, they should stand on their own 2 feet. And if they want to have both wings or left wings or no wings at all, if they're standing on their own 2 feet and relying on commercial income, and no one's watching it, for example, because they don't know what they want, because they've been financed by the people for all their life and they've got no idea what happens in the real world. But if they did that and they went belly up, it would be because their programming is it's stuffed. And so
Let me let you into a little secret.
what we're saying, John, is that if they went, so you're throwing back, and you're trying to make your point, which I understand that the BBC would cream everybody else, and they won't cream everybody else because we have a multitude of. I mean, if you set yourself up as a left wing, you would have a particular amount of people watching you as left wing. If you set yourself up as a right wing, as you say, GB News is, and they're not right wing by any stretch. They have they have a conservative base. And the BBC used to have that conservative base, and at the moment, I can probably tell you, and if you can tell me if I'm wrong, they haven't really got a base. They've got this wishy-washy group of people running the place, and you have the entire UK having to pay to keep it on board. Let's go commercial. Let them go out into the real world, not create this financial strain on anybody in the UK. Let them go commercial and see how they go. I will buy you a bottle of great scotch if they stay in business for more than 2 years. They are like all public broadcasters. They are over-subsidised people who have little talent and that rely on 10 people to do one thing.
Well, I would say let the BBC license become voluntary, not mandatory. And then I'd say that's quite democratic, right?
Please, sir, can I speak? The BBC has been run by nobody at the moment. All the heads have been chopped off, as you know, and the chairman's about to go. But here's a little secret. Do you know one of the biggest subsidisers of the BBC? Australian children. It's called Bluey, the kids program that's produced by ABC. They're owned by BBC Studios, which is the commercial arm of the BBC, and they supply an enormous amount of money towards public service BBC. So thank you very much, Australian children, for that. You know,
thank you.
We're ever so grateful to you.
John, we are almost agreeing that the playing field would not be very level if the BBC went commercial and stopped telling people to watch us. You've got to pay. But Greg had a great point though, didn't he? Greg said, "Why don't we make it voluntary?"
Look, why do we make income tax voluntary? Why do we make rates?
No. So what
council
you're
tax?
doing is, John, you're throwing
You're
things
paying
out
for
that
a
have no
service.
no bearing on what you and I are talking about.
Well, no, you're paying for a service. You're paying for a service called the BBC, which is 4 TV stations, 6 radio stations, lots of local radio stations, a world service that actually
Which I used
represents
to
the
listen
world.
to. I used to listen to. I heard the cricket.
And you don't listen to it now?
Yeah, I grew up. I actually decided I needed to work and not stay up all night listening to cricket. But Greg, the you mean, and you had a very good point there, and it's not going to happen though, of course. But the BBC, if you want to watch the BBC, if you want to pay for it, you can pay for it. There you are, and you have 1 million pounds already out of the coffers. They're not going to watch it.
Billion. But look, I'm not totally in favour of the licence fee. I actually think there should be a two-tier licence fee. You pay a basic licence fee, for which you get all the BBC, and then you have a thing called the iPlayer, and the other side of that, the BBC sells subscriptions. So you have 2 tiers. So you have the public service and you have the commercial.
So if you had your if the BBC even went subscription, first of all, they are, and you're right, John, and you know more than any of us. They're a very large organisation and a very big broadcaster.
Who produce brilliant programs? Remember,
They do. But having said that, and as they should, because they have enough money to do it. But commercial broadcasters have got to find sponsors for it, and in this day and age, it's harder than ever. But and let's face it, John, good producing, you don't need you can get by with some very clever editors, good producers, good talent. So you don't need at times to have $1 billion to produce something, but it does help. But if you though went subscription and you relied on people, say a little bit like Netflix, or GB News are free, or do what GB News does, and then have an offshoot that looked after the online media sort of things. Then maybe you can charge people if they want to go and watch something from the BBC.
Yeah, look, the BBC is a national TV archive.
But
you can make a fortune out of.
Well, then why don't they do it?
Go the other side of that, pay for it.
But why don't they do it? And why do you have to have? Why do you need a license to cover a media that people think are very biased, and they are?
Needs finance, and nobody pays for news. So unless you have a license fee, you won't have news.
But sorry, GB News provides news. ITV, or they all provide news.
Well, hang on. I said already, GB News is financed by a lot of very right-wing Christian
millionaires. They provide news.
Right-wing Christian millionaires. Who
No. See, John, we've got to stop this, all right? Because you are letting your bias slip in here, and you can't do that. They produce a very good news service.
Who do, GB News?
They do, and you know
Have
that.
you watched it?
You know that you are batting for the BBC at the moment. But if the BBC was so fantastic, they wouldn't be so confused about men having children, which is absolute garbage. And all this, it's garbage, and it's biologically wrong. It doesn't make any sense. It's biologically impossible. Yet this poor woman, Maxine, because she rolled her eyes and said women, because men cannot get pregnant. And if you say people, it means you are including both women and men. So what she did was perfectly right. So if you're talking about bias, I'm showing you now there's bias already. It's to do with the all-inclusive, we've got to be all holding hands and singing Kumbaya, providing you've got a beard and breast. So, I mean, we've got to stop that. We have to get back to, as you did in your day, and I did when I started off, I was always taught, John, tell it as it is. Not let my opinion get into it.
So should the BBC support racism if there's a racist attack?
No, but you're just throwing something at me, John. I haven't seen. And by the way, if you wish to, tell me when the last report was of an attack that happened in public that they identified the culture the person was associated with. Tell me.
I mean, that's irrelevant, but actually the South.
No, you asked me. I'm just saying. But down the track, they do.
Southport, which had, as you know, had three little girls were killed.
Mhm.
social media
Yeah, but
said
when did they do that? When did they do that, John? I'm saying that
social
what you're
media
doing.
said the attacker was a Muslim immigrant. He
I've
wasn't.
just been told I have to let Greg talk, so I'm going to shut up.
Right. What do you want the BBC to be?
Greg.
That's the central question.
Well, what do I want the BBC to be? I want it to be truthful, honest, and actually report on things which are relevant to people on the street. That is to serve public interest. It does not do that. Look for example, whenever you get these protests which the government don't particularly like. For example, when the Palestine Action Group or whatever it's called was
They're
made
banned. They're a
illegal
terrorist organization.
by the UK government.
That's been reported by the BBC. They reported
Yes,
them.
but it's not reporting things like the fact that the British police are carrying away
Yes, they are. They are
octogenarians in
reporting.
a
They
wheelchair and
reported that
things
all
like
the
this.
time. Every time these
It's
you see people with things around their neck saying, "I support Palestine action," which stupidly is illegal in this country, and the BBC does report the fact that happens. They don't offer an opinion on it.
Well, my perspective, and by looking at how these things go, the BBC is very far from the person on the street, and you can see this how people in these manifestations react when a BBC reporter comes to them. They
70
just
million
don't.
people watched the final of Celebrity Traitors the other day. Gents, I once said to Jacob Rees-Mogg on GB News, go and watch some more television, Jacob, because you plainly don't watch television. You guys should go and watch a bit more BBC, and you wouldn't be sort of coming out with sort of half-baked ideas about it.
Watching BBC should be given a warning like a packet of cigarettes. So if you watch too much BBC, you will lose a couple of IQ points because it is dumbed down.
That's your view. That's your view, Greg. That's your view.
That's my opinion.
John,
your opinion.
I've been told I shouldn't butt in, but I can't help it. Tell me about the Prescott report. It did enunciate that the BBC is biased.
Well, in case you didn't know, Prescott is a friend of Robbie Gibbs, and was recruited.
So the report
was recruited to that job by Robbie Gibb, who's a Conservative on the Board of Governors, who is determined to change the BBC into what you guys would like it to be, which is a Conservative mouthpiece. So he was recruited by him.
No, neither of us say that. We want it to tell the truth. We want it to be objective. We want it to stand on its own feet and not to be subsidised by an unwilling public.
Prescott was in front of Parliament Select Committee on Monday, and he said, "I support the BBC. I think it's a wonderful institution. I think it has faults, and all institutions have faults. So don't be." He found the Trump thing, and the BBC was at fault there, but more at fault was they actually knew about this thing in January, and they had meetings about it, and they didn't become public till November. That's just the BBC being stupid, really stupid, and so they've ended up with an own goal of their own making.
John, can I just? I'm just going to read you this. So I'm just by a full frame of mead. You can have a quick cuppa or something. While I want to read this out. This is from the Prescott report, which you said is biased. So anyway, it says the editorial failings. Prescott's memo cited a specific instant where BBC's Panorama spliced together clips from a Trump speech, making it appear he was inciting violence on January 6, 2021. Bias in coverage. The memo also alleged issues with bias to the coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. Allegations include the spreading of Hamas lies, the transgender debate, claims of covering the trans issue from a one-sided perspective that celebrated the trans experience. More, lack of action. Prescott claimed that despite incipient problems being identified, the BBC leadership failed to tackle them, leading to a perception of systematic problems. editorial blind spot. He also described the BBC's leadership as having an editorial blind spot that prevented proper action on the issues raised. So there's a couple of things there, John.
And they've resigned. And they've resigned. The two of them have resigned. The Director General and CEO of News.
Okay, so we look at the those two that have resigned. Were they editors or producers? Were they? No, they're not.
Well, hang
What
on a
about
minute.
what about? And this is what we're trying to say, that there's this bias already within the BBC, and it's not, and it's lost the trust. And we're just telling you why it's lost the trust. But you're not wanting to hear that because you're batting for the BBC. But what we're saying is that the bias is very deep, and that's why to have people to have to pay for the BBC and not want the BBC is just ludicrous, and you would have to agree. So if they could go out and do it commercially, then great, but it's not going to happen because the BBC would, John, having done this all my life, I can tell you now the BBC would not last very long at all.
It would flatten the opposition.
No, but John, that is called... That is
both ITV and Channel for
between January and August this year, 2025, there have been 9,602 complaints about BBC coverage.
The Trump thing. Do you know that before November, how many complaints do you think there were before November? How many?
John, you're sounding like you haven't left the BBC.
No, I have, but believe me, I'm a critical friend. Since it's become public, there have been 500 complaints because people like to whinge, you know. Nobody.
So anybody that criticises, anybody has a criticism, they're off with the fairies. Is that right?
No, that's not true. Of course not. The BBC has
they're whinging palms.
That's right.
But they're whinging all sorts of nationalities. But look. You come back to this question: what do you want the BBC to be?
We've already told you.
What's that?
We've already told you a number of times.
You essentially say you wanted to be a conservative propaganda outfit.
No. What we need is the BBC. Actually, what we need, I think, anyway, we're going to wrap it up fairly soon. But what we need, John, is for the BBC to be able to stand on its own 2 feet, to do it in a commercial arena. You say, and you could be correct, that it would flatten the opposition. I say that is wrong because we've already identified that GB News is full of those right wingers.
You haven't said who finances GB News.
Yeah, but see, but John, if they have, here's something. If they have, the number one news station in London right now is GB News. So GB News as a news station is probably hitting the mark pretty well at the moment, and those funders are very happy because they're seeing dollars roll in because they're hitting their target audience. Now, if the BBC went out there and you said they would flatten the field, it's not going to do that because we've already identified that the BBC hasn't got their GB audience, which is very large because it's number one in the UK at the moment. And you can't argue with that. So therefore, if you look at the other stations, ITV, which are mainly information.
LBC would argue with that, by the way.
But truly, you look at the other stations; they have their own. Program, and they have their own. So therefore, those stations they buy and pay for those particular programs, as you know, because they think it will do well. So what you have is that you have all these stations that are there, will probably stay there unless they're a mirror of the BBC. And I haven't yet not seen a mirror of the BBC.
Mike, look at the economics of it. ITV is about to be bought by an American conglomerate. Do you know that?
Great. What's wrong with that? That's great.
Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. But ITV is not making money. It's making less and less money. So Comcast, who owns Sky, are about to buy it.
But what we've done
Channel
here,
4 is struggling. Channel 5 is struggling.
But what we're doing here, and let's just, is we're guessing. So what we need to do is say, let the BBC go out there, which this is not going to happen. Let them go out there and let them be in the real world. You're saying that they would just flatten the field, but we have already identified.
It'd be very unfair. It'll be very unfair competition, and believe me,
but It wouldn't be, because you're all after that one buck.
Well,
And
you know,
first of all, BBC would be wound back enormously because they won't have the resources.
17 million people watched the final Celebrity Traitors 2 weeks ago. 17 million.
That was,
Which,
and that
which
was
in
because
Britain,
that was because it was a popular program. And I'm
well, that's
saying
which is what the BBC made.
the other stations have popular programs too, John.
Nothing like that. That's what the BBC makes. You know, Strictly Come Dancing, week after week after week, piles them in. You know, the BBC makes quality popular programs, and and in addition to that, it has a news arm which sometimes makes mistakes. All news organisations do.
Yeah. Now, what we have to do is, you know the drill, John. And Greg, just to wrap it up, Greg, where do you see the BBC? Should they be sued? Back to what we were talking about initially. Should they be sued by Donald Trump? And by the way, it says here a defamation case is not likely to succeed, as Panorama was not shown in the US and has been. But do you think? But so we won't even talk about Trump because truly it's irrelevant now. What should happen to the BBC, Greg, in your mind?
They should be legally accountable for their content. And this lawsuit, regardless of its pros and cons, illustrates this point that there needs to be legal accountability, because when there is not, you just keep on doing it again. It's not.
And there is, Greg. There is. I mean,
wait.
John, you'll have your chance in a second.
Yeah, but the point being, that system needs to be there, because people, if you get defamed and you get it deliberately defamed by having something as deceptive and manipulative as this, there needs to be an accountable. I don't like Trump, and I believe that on this particular occasion, somehow the BBC has given him some kind of moral high ground, which sort of illustrates a rather, should we say, problematic issue with the current system of content production and broadcasting in the BBC.
Made by an independent, Greg. Did you know that? It wasn't made by. It was made by an independent for the BBC. By October Films.
So, John, it's now your turn, and you have the floor, sir.
Very good. All right. Look. You have two or three great British institutions, and they have their faults. One is the monarchy, one is the BBC, and those two. What do people in the whole world know about Britain? They know a thing called the BBC, which by and large, 99% of the time, it gets it right. It makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Trouble is, the BBC is always under scrutiny, and even the smallest mistake gets blown up. But there's no defence for the Panorama editor. No defence whatsoever. Nobody's going to say that was right. That was just plain stupid, and should have actually been spotted long before it got on air. The commission editor should have spotted it, much less the producers. So leave the BBC alone, because it's a great public institution which has produced great programmes and will continue to produce great programmes in or out of the market.
Thank you, John. Just my turn, just quickly. I think the BBC, as with any state or public broadcaster, they need, because we're not talking, and what you said, John, was entirely correct in the past. It changed. Things have changed because money is harder to get. People are doing it tougher. You mentioned before that my truth, your truth, their truth, whatever. There is no such thing as my truth, their truth, your truth. There is only the truth, the fact. Tell it as it is. It's all universities now and media colleges are teaching their cadet journos to insert their opinion, and that is, I know as a fact, because that is what is happening, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing at the moment. As for the trust, John, you have to. If you're down £1 billion, it means that there is a large amount of people out there who don't want it. Now, in ratings, John, that when you do if you say, not ratings, for example, if someone calls in and you have 10 or 15 calls complaining about one thing, you can extrapolate to, and you do that by 10 or 100. So therefore, we have those 300,000 people, as you said, who don't want to pay for the BBC, who aren't going to do a license. Multiply that by 10 or 100, and that's the population, or that's the number of people who don't want the BBC. Having said that, all this is just me talking, Greg talking, you talking. The proof is in the eating of the pudding. If the BBC, I believe, in my humble opinion, and after doing this all my life, having worked in all markets, I believe that the BBC would need to wind back its resources enormously because they won't have the funds for it. They will need to wind it back, and they need to go out there in the real world and do what other media organisations do. If they can't produce, they will go bust. And that's what you and I are both agreeing on. That you saying they can produce, I'm saying they can't because they haven't got those resources. They are not, it's just simple as that. As for an institution, John, you are dead right. BBC is an institution. But as with all institutions, it's time for a bit of a shake-up. And as for Australians and the other countries that have a public broadcaster, they used to serve the public. No longer does the public want them. And to put that into context, go out into the open field, and see what happens next. I think it would be a very interesting arena. The playing surface would not be level because the BBC they do not know how to survive in the real world, and the only reason why they are there now, John, and when you were there, when they had a great reputation, they do not tell the story. They don't tell the story. They tell it from their own opinion. And that is not what we want. And this memo, which you said, the person who penned the memo, report, you said he was biased. Well, he's saying that the BBC's biased. So what we have is an impasse. I mean, you're saying that they're biased, and he's saying that the BBC's biased. What do you do? It's just
let's have an open discussion about what we want from the BBC. An open debate. Britain needs a debate.
And do you think, here's something for you, John. Do you think people really, because things have changed. Well, go back 20 years, go back 30, 40 years. People change. Do you think people really know what they want from the BBC? And do you really think, and do you think that BBC knows what the people want from the BBC?
I've been at 2 gatherings this week. One, I put on a meeting in Oxford on Tuesday night of somebody from Reform. And it was full of 70 to 80 people from Reform. And if you said the word BBC, you could hear the spitting going on from these people. And I had one great compliment. One guy in the front row said, "This has been a very hostile interview. It's almost been like a BBC interview." I said, "Thank you very much for that." And on the next day, I then went to the Voice of a Listener and Viewer, which is an old organisation, and there were lots of older men and women there. And there was one person virtually crying who couldn't understand the attacks on the BBC. So, you have these different points of view. Let's have a discussion. Let's not just have people tell us what we think.
And finally, the big one, I have to ask you this, John. Will Australia win the Ashes 4 or 5-0?
Neither. The Brits will recover. They've gone away and then they've done various things. They've probably got some sandpaper from somewhere. And
2 days. It's pretty bad, isn't it?
Well, but England could have won that.
They should have, but they didn't last past the second day. Greg,
they could have won it, but they didn't. So it's going to be very competitive because the current England team is very competitive.
I mean, I said
even though it's coached by a New Zealander.
That's right, and a very good coach too. But he needs.
And in fact, the captain is a New Zealander, isn't he?
Yes, he needs. They need to stop playing baseball and get back to playing cricket. John, John Mair, and also our dear friend Greg Simons, thank you very much for your help. Have a lovely weekend. We're going to wait till next Friday for I think Friday it's for the test 2, and I'm sure we'll talk in between. Thank you very much for joining us this week. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today. Thank you, gentlemen.